Perfect Peter. That name's always rubbed me up a little bit the wrong way. Ever since I was a child and first started reading the Horrid Henry books, I've always had somewhat of an issue with the name Perfect Peter. And then the other day, I realised why that was. There's a very good saying, it's a very short one, but it sure hits the spot. And the saying goes, nobody's perfect. And if nobody's perfect, then what does that make the perfect younger brother of Horrid Henry? On the subject of Horrid Henry is actually really easy to understand, okay? We know why he's horrid. It doesn't take a psychologist to figure that one out. He's horrid because he's acting out. He's bottom of the class academically. The kid can't behave. The kid doesn't even have any talent on the sports field. Henry is actually smart enough to figure out that the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Okay, if he misbehaves, he gets attention, and attention, even negative attention, is better than no attention. That doesn't explain, though, Perfect Peter. Why does the curly-haired younger brother of Horrid Henry feel this need to present this facade of perfection? Could there be something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Could there even be psychopathic traits hidden in plain sight? That's what we're going to explore in this video essay. If we're going to explore that, then we better have a darn good explanation of what makes a psychopath. Henceforth, that will be our next port of call. What makes a psychopath? Let's go. So, what makes a psychopath? It's a really interesting question. And when we consider psychopaths, the first thing to remember is that they're a lot more common than you might think. 1 in every 100 people is a psychopath, which is a lot. That means that, let's be honest, in all likelihood, you're interacting with a psychopath in your daily life. They might be part of your family, you know? You might go to school with them. You might work with them. Chances are you're going to be knocking around with one on at least a fairly regular basis. They don't just appear in Stephen King horror novels or Shane Dawson docuseries. If we're going to define the word psychopath, we need to be really strict with our definition. And so I turn to the father of psychopathy, a man called Robert Hare. Robert Hare defines psychopaths as having a mask of normality, but deep down they have a profound lack of empathy. What does this mean? This means that they're not really feeling any emotions towards other people. Instead, everything's an act. Everything is deep down in their best interests. They don't care about you. They care about themselves, but they're able to present that they do care about you, which in a way makes them quite dangerous. Another author called Hervey Clerkey wrote a book on the subject called The Mask of Sanity. They say that a psychopath has a facade of normality and that they're often beyond reproach, but they have a lack of a moral core. These are really important things to consider when we look at the character of Perfect Peter. Does he have a moral core? Is there any morality present within this boy? You see, 1994 was a pretty big year culturally. We had Sonic the Hedgehog coming out for the first time. We had Forrest Gump being released. Good heavens, we even had The Lion King in our screens. What more did we want? Well, actually, there is one other cultural milestone that I'd quite like to toss into the mix. Horrid Henry. The first ever book titled Horrid Henry was published in 1994. Francesca Simon, incredible writer. She would go on to write so many more amazing books, but I'll tell you something. She hid it in plain sight. Everything we need to know about Perfect Peter is there. It's right there in the first ever story published 30 years ago. We better find out what happens in that very story. So then, this story is a particularly interesting one because the whole premise of Horrid Henry as we know it is somewhat turned on its head. Such is the genius of Francesca Simon. Firstly, we meet the characters. Horrid Henry is, just simply put, an awful child. He's a disgrace. He grabs, he pushes, he snatches, he never says please, he never says thank you, never does his homework. Awful. Even his parents are completely humiliated by him. And his polar opposite, of course, is his younger brother. Perfect Peter. Always says please, always says thank you, always does his homework, always, and I mean always, eats his vegetables. For that, of course, for that good behavior, he's rewarded. And the thing is, Henry ain't stupid. He figures out that Peter gets rewards for his good behavior. And so Henry, in turn, decides, I want a bit of that for myself. I'm going to behave well, just like my little brother, so I get the rewards too. And it works. In this story, it works. But the thing is, perfect Henry, it doesn't quite have the same ring to it. And nobody thinks this more than perfect Peter. He can't stand it. He can't stand the fact that his brother is behaving well. His reaction to Henry's newfound perfection, to Henry's sudden change in behavior, tells us more than we ever could hope to imagine about perfect Peter. Here are 3 instances that tell us so much about this young angelic man and shatter the facade of perfection that he carefully cultivates. Peter, is Henry knocking your castle down? Peter longed to say yes, but that would be a lie. No, said Peter. This moment for Peter marks somewhat of a moral dilemma. Does he lie to get Henry in trouble, or does he tell the truth? It's sort of an interesting contradiction for Peter, because on the one hand, he wants to be perfect, and of course the perfect thing to do is to tell the truth, and fair play to Peter, he does tell the truth. He's tempted to lie, but he doesn't. On the other hand, his perfect facade is, as we'll find out later with the other examples, actually more important to Peter than being good, than having a moral core. So that's why he has that moment of hesitation. He thinks, hang on, even though it's a lie, it would get Henry in trouble. Okay, and that contrast between Henry's horridness and Peter's good behavior is going to look very good for perfect Peter. He's willing to toss aside his ethical considerations in order to get the results he wants, in order to build back that facade, because Peter can't take it. This story's barely been going on, okay? Henry's only been well behaved for an hour or so at this point in the story, and Peter's already contemplating lying. This instance by itself, obviously, and especially because Peter does make the right choice, does not make Peter a psychopath. I wouldn't even say at this stage it's a psychopathic trait. However, it is a bit like a pebble when a pebble flicks up and hits the windscreen of a car. Okay, it doesn't shatter the windscreen entirely, but it leaves the tiniest crack. Okay, the perfect facade of Peter has a tiny crack in it. And we're going to see how Henry's good behavior continues on hitting with those little pebbles into Peter's windscreen of perfection. I don't think I can stretch that metaphor any further, so let's move on now to the next example. Mum came into the kitchen. Smells good, she said. Thank you, darling Peter, for setting the table. What a good boy you are. Peter did not say anything. I set the table, Mum, said Henry. Mum stared at him. You, said Mum. This scene serves as a chilling insight into the psyche of perfect Peter. He's eerily silent for a change, isn't he? Normally, he can't wait to pipe up whenever Henry does anything wrong, that is, or whenever he wants his parents to be aware of just how fantastically behaved he is. Yet here, he's silent. He's mute, in fact. So it's up to Henry to point out that it was in fact him that laid the table. Why does Peter choose to be silent in this moment? Well, it's very simple. Choosing to remain silent allows the perfect Peter, Horrid Henry contrast to live on, doesn't it? Because think about it. The mother assumes, okay, based on patterns of the past, that it's Peter that's bothered to lay the table for their lovely family dinner that's being cooked by their father. And yet it is in fact Henry who's on his perfect arc, if you will, who has done it. Peter, really here, you can really see, and by the way, this is all on the first day of Henry behaving well. Peter lacks a moral core. There's nothing below the surface with him. There's no actual sense of goodness. It's all just to get the rewards, to get the positive praise from the parents. This is psychopathic. I genuinely believe this is a psychopathic trait from Perfect Peter. Peter stretched out his foot and kicked Henry. Ouch, said Henry. Don't be horrid, Henry, said Dad. Now this act from Perfect Peter is so devious. It's so underhand. And the reason why he's kicking Henry is a lot more complex and a lot more sort of psychologically interesting than you might think. I think that when Henry hurts Peter, it's for a simple reason. Okay, it's out of jealousy. Peter's better at school than him. Peter's better at doing chores than him. He can keep his room tidy. He can brush his hair. He can do all the things that get praise from the parents. And Henry's acting up because of jealousy. Okay, and like I said earlier in the video, he wants the attention too. However, with Peter, it's so much more calculated. In a single kick, Peter is hoping to revert things back to the status quo. Why do I say that? I say that because Henry is being kicked by Peter in the hopes that Henry will kick him back, in turn shattering the perfect Henry image that he's cultivated throughout this story. Yet, all Peter achieves is nothing really. His parents don't care, okay, because Henry gets blamed anyway, and at the same time, Henry doesn't retaliate. All Peter does is shatter, in the eyes of the reader, his own perfect image. And how manipulative is it, by the way, to put your own brother's well-being and toss it under the bus? You know, he doesn't care. He's hurting Henry in the hopes of getting hurt back himself. He's willing to cause his own brother physical pain in order to play the victim card. It's so much more underhand than what Henry does to Peter. And again, I do call it psychopathic. I just think there's a lack of a moral core there. Okay. Peter's behaving well so he can get the praise. Peter's behaving well so he can get the credit. Peter's not behaving well because it's the right thing to do. Peter's not behaving well because it makes him feel good. It's just not like that. Okay, if you're willing to physically hurt your brother so that you can be the one getting sympathy from your parents, then that's psychopathic. Okay, it's a trait of a psychopath. The really interesting thing about this story is it shows that Peter has a naughty side. Okay, he's willing to lie. Almost. He doesn't go through with it, but he considers it. He's willing to deceive. He's willing to kick. This is all interesting stuff. This tells us that Peter is repressing his personality in every other Horrid Henry story. Peter feels the need to present this facade of perfection because of his parents. Okay, because that's what his parents want. That's what his parents need. His parents need him to be perfect, especially because Henry is so horrid. And I know this, it's also telling because of the way that this story ends. The story ends with Peter being sent to his room in disgrace because he lobs a bowl of spaghetti. He's aiming for Henry, okay, but he misses. He hits Henry's mum and his own mum, I don't know why I said Henry's mum, both of their mothers, in the face. And it's quite a hilarious sight. Henry starts laughing too and also gets sent to his bedroom. But it's telling that the one instant that Peter lets his guard down, okay, the one time he's not perfect, he's disgraced. He's isolated from everybody else. He's banished to his bedroom. Whatever you think of Perfect Peter's character, psychopath or not, he's a product of his parents' expectations. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you for staying with me on this journey as we've looked at whether Perfect Peter can be considered a psychopath. What do you think? Do you think he's a psychopath? Or do you think his manipulative behavior can be put down to his parents' quite frankly insane expectations for his behavior? Which one do you reckon? I always think which one out of Henry and Peter, if say they grew up, 20 years in the future, which one would be more well adjusted? Would it be Perfect Peter? Would it be Horrid Henry? My money's on the latter, by the way. I reckon Henry's just playing up and he's a perfectly regular kid. But Peter is being sort of damaged in a way by these crazy expectations that his parents have for him. They want him to be an angel, okay? They want him to be whiter than white, and it's too much. Nobody's perfect, as we said in the introduction. Please subscribe if you've enjoyed this, and remember to drop a like. I really appreciate your support. I'm aiming to get to 100 subscribers, actually. For me, that's a big milestone. So thank you so much for sticking with it, and Snipe Snap out.